Hey, Urban Monk here. In this episode, I want to offer my thoughts on the first 3 episodes of Long Way Up, the motorcycle adventure show on Apple TV with Ewan McGregor and Charlie Boorman. Welcome to Urban Monk TV. So, hey, thanks for joining me here. I'm out in my shop where you guys are used to me wrenching on, lately, the CX500 that I'm restoring, but also wrenching on Mr. Corton and my Cafe Racer and my V-Strom. And I, like many of you, have been anticipating and waiting anxiously for this wonderful program that is finally out. And I just got done watching the first 3 episodes of Long Way Up. Probably like you, I have seen all of the previous installments, I'll call them, Long Way Round and Long Way Down, and seen them multiple times. I'm a huge fan of these guys, and I just think what they do is fantastic. So I wanted to offer my thoughts, not only as someone who has watched the other shows in the past, but someone who's an avid motorcyclist, someone who's knowledgeable about motorcycling and the mechanics of motorcycling, but then also as someone who, like many of you, I imagine, has to, because of circumstances, live a bit vicariously through these guys. I too would love to go out and do these trips and do exactly what they're doing, but I can't. I have a family, and as many of you know, I'm caregiver to my wife who's on dialysis right now. So that's an aside. I just wanted to give my thoughts on these first 3 episodes. It's Friday afternoon here in Los Angeles, and I just got done watching the first 3 episodes. Again, they're on Apple TV, Apple TV Plus to be specific. And in a word, fantastic. They're everything that I loved about the original 2, Long Way Round and Long Way Down. But here we go again, and the same characters. Let's talk about the characters. Clearly, Ewan McGregor and Charlie Boorman are there, but who else is there? Russ and David, they're there driving along in trucks, and I'll talk about the trucks later. Stay tuned about the trucks. It's interesting. And on the camera, Claudio is back and Jimmy is back. So very cool to have kind of the whole family that we're used to back to traveling around the world. As many of you may already know, they go from the absolute southern tip of South America, Tierra del Fuego, and they're on their way up 13,000 miles to Los Angeles. One of the questions I had to myself was, why didn't they go all the way to Alaska? They do talk about that in the program, where they've already been on a lot of that route on Long Way Around, and they'd be repeating it. So I get that. And 13,000 miles, doing it the way they're doing it is a long way. Let me talk about how they're doing it. Probably no surprise here, they're doing it on electric motorcycles. That has been well publicized, and they're Harley-Davidson live wires that have been modified to not look like the street bike that we've seen in all of the promotional materials from Harley, but they raised the ride height and worked on suspension. They built some protection around them, took some plastic parts off and replaced them with metal parts, and beefed them up so that they're adventure bikes, and they look pretty legit. One of the things, though, and I think this is where I am a pretty good commentator for this adventure they're on. For the past 4.5 years, I've owned an electric vehicle, and I'm used to living with an electric vehicle on a day-by-day basis. Now, granted, my electric vehicle is a car, and its base is at home in my garage, But living with one, you do learn pretty quickly how your behaviors have to change drastically. Those of you who've watched Long Way Round and Long Way Down are used to seeing Charlie doing wheelies, every third time the camera is on him riding. No more wheelies. At least I haven't seen one yet. Well, there's a reason for that, because you've got to manage your power if you're going to make your range, make your distance, make your destination. This show is fascinating how the challenge is all the same challenges they had before: the weather, bad roads, do we make the ferry on time? Are we going to have a safe and clean place to sleep? All of that. But they've added to it this challenge of keeping those bikes charged, and it's significant. I was used to the previous shows, Round and Down, where they, often they'd say, we've got 400 miles to go until we get to the ferry, and the ferry leaves. And in this episode, what you hear a lot of is, we've got a long day of riding for 100 miles. Well, those of us on conventional bikes know that riding 100 miles that's nothing, right? And it's nothing to those guys too. But as soon as you sit your butt on an electric bike and you're in the middle of nowhere and you weren't able to successfully charge it all night because there just wasn't the infrastructure there, 100 miles is suddenly a long trip. But I don't want to spoil everything for you. Clearly, the electrical piece of this it's a big deal. It adds a huge amount to the adventure. Well, here's another point I'll talk about. Speed. In the previous ones, Round and Down, you'll often see shots of them riding and they're speeding along and there's this big plume of dust behind them, and clearly they're going maybe 60 miles an hour, maybe more than that. All of the riding shots, you can tell right away they're much slower. And I know why that is, because I drive an electric car, and there's a point at which the drag of the friction coefficient of the wind around the vehicle, you just hit a point where your efficiency just tanks if you're going too fast. In my car, that's about 60 miles an hour if I really want to get all that I can out of my range. If I go over that, I'm paying a stiff penalty in range for every mile an hour over 60. And so these guys are in the middle of nowhere, and range and getting there is everything to them. They are riding slower, and you can see it, and I know why. I get it. That's interesting. I did want to comment about how they're not just doing another adventure show, another adventure program. They're really making a conscious effort to move the technology forward, to play their part in getting us as a motorcycling community to think about electric transportation and the future of electric. And I think they're doing a wonderful job of it. But along the way, they're stopping at points of interest. They stop and visit some people who live in the middle of nowhere protecting king penguins down in Argentina. And they stop at in this mountain range, they stop at another, I forget the name of the place. But it's a completely self-sufficient, self-powered, they're treating their water, zero impact on the environment kind of community. And it's also like a hostel where people have come to stay. So they're really bringing out in their program some changes that are happening out there, real people making a difference, and they're helping to bring that message to the rest of the world that people are making a difference. It's pretty cool.
If you like motorcycles, custom builds, or just like a good story about a man's 3-year effort to build a tribute to his childhood teacher, get a copy of Creating Mr. Corton. In it, you'll learn how this man changed this man for the better. How this man took this and built this. how these guys became lifelong friends and enthusiasts of motorcycling and craftsmanship, and how the name Urban Monk originated. It's available from Amazon anywhere in the world that Amazon ships, in both paperback and ebook, or you can purchase through a link found on urbanmonktv.com. Get your copy of Creating Mr. Corton today.
One of the constants throughout Up and Round and Down, all of these programs, the thing that strikes me is that these two guys get themselves in, of course Claudio's with them, so it's three. They get themselves into some pretty difficult situations, and people help them out. Time and time again, people help. I think that's one of the most important messages of this program, is that while we usually go on television and we get all of these images of how we are divided as people, divided as nations, divided in our views and outlook of the future, and we're really just getting hammered with this message of divisiveness and how, just the worst of humanity all the time. Here, Charlie and Ewan are out showing us on a face-to-face basis how people help other people out. And, that's my experience when I go out in the world and I meet other people. People are nice to me, and I'm nice to them. This is, I think, one of the most wonderful things about this program is you see some guys who get themselves into a position of vulnerability in a big way, time and time again, and people, they don't take advantage of them, they help them over and over. It's probably the greatest gift of this program, is that right there. One of the things that you may ask is, what about the charging infrastructure? How are they charging these bikes? Rivian, the Ford offshoot building the electric truck, these guys are actually taking the first two, I won't even call them production because they make it clear that they're really prototypes, but they are giving them serial numbers or VIN numbers. And these things are the first two Rivian trucks to go out and do this huge adventure. So that's what David and Russ are riding in, along with support people and all of the equipment. There's also a Sprinter van with a solar panel on it. And the big question becomes, do they ever get in a situation where they've got to use, like a diesel generator or some sort of petroleum or something to charge the bikes? Watch the show to find out. Really interesting. I will say this. It's fascinating how much renewable energy they do find, like a lot. When I'm watching this, I thought about how it must have been when the first automobiles were coming into the world in, prior to the turn of the century, like late 1800s, early 1900s, and people were going on adventures for long distances without the infrastructure, without the gas stations. And that's essentially what these guys are doing. They're going out there without the charging stations. And Rivian, to their credit, has put into place a lot of charging stations for them. Like they need 12,000 miles worth of charging stations to make this trip happen. That's incredible. And so Rivian helped out a lot there. I'm fascinated to see what Rivian as a company can do. I know that Rivian is, Ford, but still cool. Still moving in the right direction. I drive an American-made electric plug-in hybrid, and I love it. I think it's the greatest car GM didn't sell very many of, but I love that car. That's an aside. Back to the show. A couple of the best quotes that I got from watching the show I want to share with you. This one from Charlie. You can't control the outcome of anything, really, but you want to try. I mean, talk about a metaphor for life, right? We all are trying to control what happens to us, and the reality is I learned long ago that I'm not in control of just about anything in my life. And I say that as someone who thought he'd be doing one thing in 2020. And what am I doing? Well, we're all dealing with COVID. Nobody thought that was going to be their 2020. And then I'm doing caregiving for my wife. And I'm happy to do so, but it wasn't what I would have controlled my life into doing. I thought it was a great metaphor. Kudos to Charlie for that one. Ewan, who impressed me, okay, what is it about celebrities, actors, people who are real successful out there? We get these generalizations that in some way things are taken care of for them all the time and they don't really know how to get along in the real world. I'm just so pleased to see that Ewan is not only able to get along just fine in the world, he's able to go out into the world and put himself in these vulnerable situations. And he's smart. This guy, he's no wimp at all. And you say, well, why would you even think he is a wimp? Because we think celebrities are wimps for some reason. Why is that? They're not. They're real people. He figured out this issue with the charging system on the Livewire motorcycle. He knew and could conceive of the fact that there's a separate, smaller 12-volt battery for all of the electronics around it, separate from the high-voltage batteries that actually propel and provide power for the drive systems on the bike. He fundamentally gets how this bike works. I was impressed with that as somebody who's a tech head. I thought that was really cool. And he figured it out, and then he said, here's another great metaphor, satisfying solving problems. Interruptions are the journey. I love it. I thought that was the best quote. Interruptions are the journey. I mean, that's life, right? We're just interrupted by all this stuff that happens while we're here living our lives. So kudos to both Charlie and Ewan for some great metaphors for life. This quote really, I think, sums up what the new challenge is on this adventure versus the other shows where they had internal combustion engines on conventional motorcycles. Ride too fast and you run out of charge. Ride too slow and the sun goes down, the temp drops to dangerous levels. Right in the first 3 episodes, you realize that these guys are riding a balancing act between, we got to get there, so there's pressure to ride fast. But I already spoke about how you can't ride fast if you want to get the range out of the bike. But you got to meet the ferry, or you got to just simply beat sundown because the temperature is plummeting, the ice is going to start to form on the road, and you can't be caught out there all night in the middle of this stuff. It's cold enough down in Tierra del Fuego where they're going to die out there if they spend the night, outdoors. So there's some adventure. The last thing I'll say is how much these guys really appreciate that they're on the trip. I'm sure they're involved with a huge amount of planning ahead of time. And the anticipation of going, but once they get going, Ewan says to Charlie, we're very lucky the things we see, aren't we? And he's looking at some beautiful glacier at the time he says that. And it warmed my heart to see that these guys really appreciate the miracle that they are out living this lifestyle for a short period of time and being able to share it with us. And that's the last thing I will say is how grateful I personally am to Ewan, to Charlie, to Russ, to David, to Jimmy and Claudio, everybody that was involved with the production of these programs. They've really done a lot for me as a viewer and enriched my life. So just maybe you guys will end up watching this. I doubt it, but if you do, a sincere thank you. It's meant a lot. So thanks for watching Urban Monk TV. I hope you liked my thoughts on Long Way Up. Watch the show. It's fantastic. If you want to come back to my channel, lately I've been working on the restoration of a Honda CX500 and I'm putting a stator in it from RM Stator. And if you like what I'm doing here, give me a thumbs up and subscribe if you want to become an urban monk. And finally, check out my book, Creating Mr. Corton, which is a memoir of the building of my cafe racer from a 1978 Suzuki GS 550. Hey, thanks for watching.